Thank you both for joining us here on Dialogue. Let me start by introducing you more formally. Joan Farini-Mundy is the Assistant Director of the Education and Human Resources Division of the National Science Foundation. And Sue Allen is the Acting Director for the Division on Research and Learning in Formal and Informal Settings. Joan, your division oversees research and development in science education, and Sue, your area includes, among other things, research and learning outside of the classroom. In this, why is there such a push currently for STEM education? And perhaps we should start with, what is STEM education?
That's a great question. Actually, it's a fairly recent term, and for us it's become kind of a useful shorthand. STEM in full is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And those are related fields in science. Actually, one of the reasons that we kind of use this little convenient shorthand is that a lot of science is now multidisciplinary, and that really those sorts of skills kind of overlap in terms of real science, and also in terms of careers, as we'll, I guess, talk about in a minute, and also in terms of the kinds of skills. All of them sort of have similar requirements in terms of like critical thinking and analytical skills and problem solving. So there's a nice sort of a little cluster of concepts there.
Why is it so important now to push STEM education?
Well, almost every national report that we read talks about the importance of STEM as we seek to be a nation that's innovative, that's leading the world in creating solutions to some of society's hardest problems. STEM turns out to be central in solving a lot of those problems, and at the same time, STEM is pretty central in everybody's everyday life too, as you think about making decisions about your health, as you make decisions about how to even understand the newspaper and look at economic information and so on. And so we are pleased here at the National Science Foundation that there's such a national focus on the importance of these areas, which is where we really make our most specialized investments in education.
Why aren't Americans as prepared in areas of STEM education as they should be?
Well, it's true that American results on the international studies are not always as encouraging as we'd like for them to be. It's complicated, of course. First of all, what happens in the K through 12 grades is really very important for STEM because it sets the foundation for what our students might do in post-secondary education or in the workforce directly. So one area of great focus, of course, is on ensuring that we have really solid, interesting, compelling instructional materials for learners K through 12, and that those are coherent so that what one studies in the third grade then isn't necessarily repeated and redone in the fourth grade, but we build on that and we move to the next topics. So one concern, of course, is to be sure that we have coherence and solid preparation for the students in terms of what they're seeing in their instructional materials. At the same time, being sure that teachers are really well prepared to teach their disciplines, particularly in K through 12, another major area of focus. And then finally, with the diversity of the nation's classrooms, it's really important that teachers have the preparation to work well with students who bring a whole range of very different experiences to the classroom. And so our agency is very focused on trying to invest in the very best ideas in the country to be sure that these kinds of areas are improved.
You know, it's hard for a lot of teachers these days to think about STEM education when they have a couple of different things kind of on their plate. First of all, let's talk about No Child Left Behind. It didn't really focus on science. What impact had that had on science learning and science literacy to this point?
Yeah, that's one of the big concerns in the science community, is that, of course, we are a nation now teaching to the test, and to the extent that math and English language arts are really dominating the accountability on the national scale, we have a corresponding reduction that we're seeing in a lot of classrooms around the nation where there's less time for science, particularly at the elementary grades. There's often very little time for science, but also in the middle school. So that is a major concern.
Is there something the National Science Foundation can do to help change that? Is there some national policy you'd like to work on?
Well, of course, a lot of education in this nation is state-based. We also are very interested in helping with that, and one of the ways that we're helping is supporting research and studies on the Common Core standards, which are now, of course, happening in mathematics and English language arts and are coming in science. There's a framework that's about to come out very soon in the next few months about science, and will have some of the same qualities we expect in terms of emphasizing learning of a smaller number of topics, not 1,000 ideas sort of in a shallow way, but but a few really core concepts in science and studying them deeply. And so states that subscribe to that approach will be looking for ways to align to those standards and help students and teachers to be assessing to those standards and learning material in a more flexible and deep way, which research has shown does provide long-term success more so than having a very shallow curriculum.
Could you explain take one of those concepts that you think is important to teach that'll be part of the core standards?
Let's see. Well, one idea, actually, I know that the actual document is under review right now, so I can pick an example from my recollection, and it may not actually be in the final standards. So with that said, one of the ideas I think that's really key is the idea of scaling of different phenomena. In the physical sciences, you have properties that are very different as you scale from small things to larger things. And this is very important if you're building bridges, to know that an infrastructure at a certain scale, when you double the size of something, its volume goes up 8 times. And that has enormous implications for everything from architecture and engineering to health treatments and living organisms, the size of organisms, and so there's just tremendous applicability of a general powerful idea like that.
And I would chime in on that if it's okay, because I come from the mathematics field, and a key mathematical concept that is in the Common Core standards has to do with fractions and proportional thinking, which is the foundational mathematics that leads to this ability to do scaling. So when you think about reading maps or imagining the ratios between various kinds of quantities, it's a mathematical foundation in fractions that starts as early as the 2nd grade that enables us by middle school then to really to move into these science applications in much more interesting ways.
Are there changes coming in how we think of science literacy for outside the classroom in those more informal learning settings?
Yeah, that's such a great area, and a really exploding area, I would say, is that we're really moving, and technology has helped a lot, I think, in terms of the mobile applications that people are carrying every day, of course the internet, and all these various technologies that are allowing us to really learn so much outside the classroom. And I think we all do it every day. We use these sort of online resources, or we go to Wikipedia to find out things. We have a huge number of informal science resources available to people, and some of the ones that NSF funds in particular are some of the broadcast things that you'll find on TV, especially for young kids. We have things like PEEP and Cyberchase that are available and SciGirls for younger learners, and right up through Nova and Nova Science Now and those sorts of specials available. So there's a whole broadcast set of media. And often now, one of the changes is that those tend to have links to the internet so that you can follow up in your family if you're interested in that topic and find out more, engage in games, find out about other organizations and institutions that are doing similar things. There's also a lot of, one other thing I wanted to just highlight for possibly interested viewers is the citizen science movement, which is becoming increasingly popular and a fascinating area to invest some of your leisure time, if you have leisure time, which is that we have increasingly scientists are turning to the public to help them with answering real research questions. A lot of them are sort of environmental questions about populations of birds or squirrels. Some of them are questions about the galaxies. You can sign up and learn how to identify galaxies and really be furthering the research. And you can also now ask questions of these sorts of databases, helping to identify craters on the moon and what this says about the history of our planetary system. And so many other acoustics, learning about, there are scientists trying to discover what kinds of acoustic environments make us feel different ways. So there are just a lot of different citizen science projects on the go, and they usually are really fun to do. You can sign up and learn some skills and to essentially become a scientist yourself for a short period of time and get a feel for what it's like to really contribute to some real research.
Is that line between formal learning and informal learning blurring? Has technology kind of pushed that to blur together?
Very much so. We're seeing that more and more. And I was just noticing last weekend, I uploaded the new Smithsonian's application. I think it's called LeafSnap, which allows you to carry on your little mobile phone a little application that allows you to take a photograph of a leaf that you see, and it's uploaded, and they try to identify it for you. And there's also a little game where you can test your skills and find out as you get better to practice on some things, and then try to identify trees yourself. So I think this. There's a lot of ways that people are turning to the internet, and also communities. I mean, that's the other thing that's happening, is we have people who are interested in similar things spontaneously getting together and talking to each other as they're finding out more about science and the world around them.
The other, besides No Child Left Behind and its emphasis not on science, the other big issue in the classrooms, at least at all levels, K through university, is the amount of money devoted to science. Does it concern you that as budgets are being cut across the state, that science is going to get lost?
Well, I think one, at the National Science Foundation, the kind of thing that we're able to do is to invest in the development of the very best, most cutting-edge, interesting ideas for classroom science, for out-of-school science, for resources that can be made available widely to teachers and to students. And so I think it's always challenging in constrained resource times to do things well. But nonetheless, there are lots of ways to bring the fundamental ideas of science into the classroom that are out and available and relatively inexpensive. And so I think the challenge is to be sure that teachers have the background and inclination and preparation to be creative with their teaching of science, to go and look for resources and to combine them well to help their students connect to the out-of-school science resources that are available, and to build curricular coherence through what they can assemble in interesting ways.
I was just going to chime in there too, that one of the things to really bear in mind about STEM areas is that they really are, we see them at NSF as a major investment in the economy, that these are really not so much costs as money that comes back multiple fold. And if you look back at the economic data over the last century, actually, you find that in America the US investments in science and technology are responsible for, I think I've heard estimates of up to a half of the massive growth in per capita wealth in the country. So we really have been fueled by these investments in science and technology expertise, and the predictions that you hear coming from the National Academy of Sciences and other places are that this is only going to be more so, that really where we need to go is that if 4% is an estimate that I've heard from those studies, 4% of the workers in the US are in STEM fields, and those people are really leveraging expertise for the other 96%. So this is just a hugely important area for us to be investing in, because those, also the expansion, those are the jobs in technology, engineering, science and mathematics, not even just the specific jobs of people who are professional scientists, but that tier of technicians and people who are in technical fields, nursing, medical care, biomedical technology, all those sorts of fields are going to be the areas that are going to show most expansion. So this is an area where, for our own economic benefit, we really want to be investing heavily.
Is there an age where we lose kids? Their interest, I mean, because kids have such a wonderful imagine, especially elementary school kids, they love science. It's so cool.
Yeah.
But we seem to lose them. Is there a key age that we need to worry about?
Yeah, that's such a great question. The research suggests that we lose people at different stages. One of the key stages that we do lose people is in the transition from high school to college. What we find is that one of the issues around this is actually gender too, is that boys and girls are both doing very equally well in high schools, and then round about college is where we lose a lot of people, and in particular we lose girls. Some of the research has interestingly shown that even though that's where it shows up as an issue, often what's happening is that we're losing that group of people much earlier. There was a wonderful study by Robert Tye that showed that by 8th grade, actually, students generally can tell if they are expecting to be in a STEM field or not. And it turns out that their sort of anticipation and interest in being in a STEM field at 8th grade or by 8th grade is a better predictor of whether they will actually graduate in a STEM field than their achievement level. So this was sort of a wake-up call to us that actually the interest is being set quite a bit earlier than we thought. And I think it's one of the other research findings I'll just mention around the age question is that we've learned over the last 10 years that we used to think that very young kids couldn't really do proper science, but they couldn't do sort of analysis or causal reasoning or those sorts of advanced science things until they were in 13 or 14. And what we've learned is that actually that isn't true at all, that even very young, even infants actually are doing a version of causal reasoning that is really quite impressive. So one of the shifts I think that's happening is that we're realizing that getting to kids really younger and keeping that enthusiasm that you mentioned at the elementary grades and very young is really key to supporting them and helping them realize that there are really exciting things in this field that they can move forward with.
You know, I think a piece of that has to do with teachers believing that kids can do science and mathematics from young ages and that they can do sophisticated reasoning, sophisticated logic. In informal ways, essentially. And so a part of this is about having high expectations for kids, making sure that they do get to tackle hard and challenging problems and learn to stay with those in mathematics, to learn that not everything gets done in 1 or 2 minutes sometimes. And so to combine the expectation that these are complex, challenging fields, but very young learners can do a very great amount of thinking is really important in the teaching.
And actually, can I riff off that for a moment and just say another piece of research that I found fascinating is about Carol Dweck has done some work on people's beliefs about intelligence. It turns out that the population is kind of split half-half. Half of us think that intelligence is something innate that you're just born with, and the other half think that it's something that you can acquire through effort. And it turns out that and particularly, I think, the STEM fields, mathematics and science, are susceptible to that. You know, I'm good at science, or I've never been good at science. It turns out that there's a lot of research now showing that what you believe really affects how well you do. And it's actually the people who believe in the effort model and the I have to work to get there model, that the idea of perseverance in the face of adversity, that is exactly what gets you through the challenges to the level of expertise, to success. And it affects grades, it affects success in careers. So one of the things that I would encourage folks to think about when they're working with their families and in any kind of teaching setting is to encourage people, don't say to them, well done, you have an innate, you're good at this, as much as saying, well done that you made the effort and that you're struggling and working and striving, that actually is not just a nice thing to say to people, but it is actually at the heart of what can make performance better.
There's a national study that was just recently released. About making STEM education more concrete in the classroom? Could you tell me just a little bit about that?
Yes, sure. This is a study that the National Science Foundation requested be performed by the National Research Council, and this is because Congressman Frank Wolf from Virginia has been very concerned about K-12 STEM performance in the country, and he challenged all of us to find out what are the best practices around the country in STEM education and how can we sort of summarize those and do a better job in making that well known across the country so that schools can begin to move in these positive directions. So the report has been completed, the first stage of it has been released, and this does focus on some fairly major categories that have to do with instructional practices that can lead to improved STEM performance, as well as features about schools and school context that have to do with supportive administration, administrators that understand the directions and needs of STEM teachers, support for teachers in general, and then relative to instruction, again, high expectations and a focus on bringing students high quality experiences. So we see this report as a great jumping off point for all of us across the country to use as a conversation starter for how to put our focus on improving K-12 STEM education.
And I'll just chime in there and say one of the things that came out of the report that I thought was particularly interesting was several characteristics of schools and districts that have had shown increases in their test scores, spectacular increases in terms of math and science, or significant, I should say. And one of the findings was that one characteristic is involvement of parents and communities in school life, and schools that are welcoming of parent involvement and that connect to community organizations. And I just mention that again for any of your viewers who might be wondering how they can contribute and get involved if they're not actually teachers themselves. Being involved is really shown by research to be a very helpful thing.
Before we end up with this interview, I did want to get a piece of advice from both of you. How would you advise policymakers here in Idaho to improve STEM education here locally at the K through 12 level and also at the college level?
Well, one thing I think we really hope they would embrace the standards movement, these Common Core standards being part of a national conversation, but really driven by the needs of the states. The research report talks about the importance of a coherent, rigorous, aligned set of standards, and the NRC has really worked hard to put such a thing together with a lot of input from folks around the country. So I think aligning, taking a real careful look at that and considering aligning with the science standards as Idaho has already done with math, I think would be a really great start. Also, from some of these studies, investing in leadership, creating a school climate. It turns out that leadership and the commitment of leadership to create a climate where teachers are always learning, where they're getting extended, coherent professional development is really critical. So supporting the leadership of schools and districts is one key component.
And I would just add to that in the policy environment, which sometimes separates the K through 12 community from the higher ed community, I think that the articulation between the two is really quite crucial. So making sure that as policymakers tackle issues of improving STEM education, as they think about assessment, as they think about high school graduation requirements, as well as college entry, higher ed entry requirements, assessments, and so forth, if everybody's sort of in the same room with the K through 12 folks talking to the higher ed groups, as well as to those who are involved in teacher preparation, which sometimes is yet again a little bit disconnected. I think coherence in policy is really important to create the kinds of environments that will allow everybody to thrive in STEM.
Well, Joan, Sue, thank you very much for joining us there in Virginia. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Thanks for inviting us.
It
It was
much.
terrific.